So I'm Ernest. I lead people analytics and people strategy at Salesforce. I've been there about 8 years, leading a team of researchers, engineers, and data scientists, really trying to do what Aaron was talking about and really driving this sense of, organizations being more than just groups of people meant to just produce a product, right? Organizations can be a fundamental component to having people find fulfillment, and that takes a certain, ethic, and it takes a certain type of mindset in terms of how you craft your organization and craft your culture. And so that's some of the work that we're doing at Salesforce currently.
Michelle?
Michelle Deneau. I lead the people analytics and insights team as well as our technology organization. And within my team, the way we are thinking about this is how do we leverage both the data and the technology together to deliver insights, but also better employee experiences and simpler employee experiences. Many of you know Adobe and our products are all about creating experiences, so we're applying the same kind of principles there, and it just requires a massive amount of data and data architecture and how you think about the technology. So I'm just really excited about the way my organization is coming together to do that in the employee experience space, but also very passionate about the ethics of it all, because as I constantly ask my team, just because we can doesn't mean we should. So this is an area I'm very happy to be part of a panel on. So thank you, Al, for emailing me first thing this morning.
Yeah. Well, and so if you came in late, Jonathan Farrar unfortunately isn't feeling well. So Michelle kindly stepped in. So thank you for doing that. The question that I have, and I have actually many questions, but I'm going to prioritize this one, is that as we have this mission to improve the employee experience. And actually, show of hands, who here in their organization has an employee experience initiative or something of that ilk? So a fair number of you. And I'm not going to ask this question. Yes, I am. Of those who do, how connected is the people analytics function, the data that's being generated through that experience? Another show of hands. Where is a really strong connection between people analytics and employee experience? So not as many hands, certainly, so therein lies both an opportunity and a potential miss, because I see employee experience happening over here in organizations and people data and analytics. And the framing question or comment I want to make around this is, Ernest, you mentioned that there's an ethos around it, that leadership says this is what we're going to do. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, go figure it out. But what's the connection like between employee experience and people data and analytics? And I think it's almost evidenced in your job title, because you're also responsible for people strategy and the data and analytics. Is that right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to think about is how are we using data to really cultivate the conditions that allow an employee to really thrive or find fulfillment or be engaged, whatever sort of words you want to use. And then think about how we use data to create those conditions, as opposed to really using data to try and sort of push people and manipulate people into driving their productivity. So the way I think about the strategy that we try and take at Salesforce and the work that we do in our organization really is around, what are the conditions? We know that, Jeffrey Pfeffer has written many papers on those conditions. There's hundreds of research articles on what are the conditions that allow a person to find fulfillment, to thrive, and things like that. How can we start to create those conditions? And those are the things that we should be responsible for in measuring, as opposed to really that individual type of inspection of are you thriving? Are you thriving? Right. So those are some of the little nuances that we try and think about.
Yeah. So staying with you, Ernest, I imagine everyone is listening here and going, makes perfect sense. But then you actually got to go do it, and you got to do it with these people throughout the organization, IT, operations, finance, legal. So how do you bring alignment through all these groups that have to be aligned to affect positive change and change that actually is cohesive for the employee base?
I mean, it starts at the top, and it starts with the values that you bring to the, as a company, right? And so if you value your employees as critical members of driving your overall business value proposition, then it sort of shifts the mindset of how you approach your employees, right? So like for us at Salesforce, we don't have inventory. We don't have like physical tangible projects. We don't have factories. Everything that we produce is primarily based in the minds of our employees, right? And so the employees are that product, and you have to think about how are you nurturing that that product, right? So that starts with that mindset that allows you to sort of shift the way that you're starting to think about things. So we call ourselves a customer-focused company, and when you start to look at your employees as customers, that starts to change the way that you completely approach human resources, IT, legal, workplace services, all of those different functions as well. So.
Thanks for that. And I see you nodding, Michelle, and I imagine that goes into your wheelhouse because you've spent a lot of time, not only at Adobe, but previously thinking about how the employee experience affects downstream outcomes, including the customer experience. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Thinking about the employees as your end customer, and at Adobe, like Salesforce, it's our people. Without our people, our products won't exist and won't work. We don't manufacture anything. So it is very critical, and I feel fortunate at Adobe we have kind of coming into that role from a position of strength. We have such a strong culture, and the premise we've even started with to say we have a strong culture, we have fabulous, really smart, dedicated employees. How do we keep them focused on doing what they do best, and have taken that angle with some of the work that we have done of how do we get them out of a multi-step 8-week-long merit process that nobody wants to do anyway, right? We all like the benefit of getting our bonuses and our pay increases, but nobody wants this lengthy, laborious process. How do we get our folks back to the things that they're passionate about and are really good about, and removing those barriers? So even starting with that kind of concept of getting people back to their day jobs, getting them back to the things that they're good at, helps us think about our employee experiences a little bit differently, because I do believe sometimes as HR experts, we get very caught up in our own complexity. And it's like, oh, but look at all the complexity. I can show how hard I work and how much this is. And it's like, no. Average manager doesn't care. They really don't. They don't want to know how hard we work. They want to get back to their jobs so that they can work hard. So I think it's a bit of a mindset shift, too, of creating an amazing experience for our employees with some of the things that we do just simply means how do we leverage data to get them through that process faster? How do we simplify it? To be really thoughtful about what decisions need to be made versus which ones, like, let's just automate and pass that step through, as long as it's within guardrails. So I think that's part of how we're thinking about the employee experience is don't catch your managers and your leaders up so much in the HR administrative tasks, and having them focus on how do they unlock the potential of their talent.
So what I'm hearing, that echoes what Ernest said about creating the conditions. And one of the things I think we all struggle with, and I'm going to capture what Dr. Pfeffer shared yesterday about taking this customer orientation, like you just both talked about in one form or another, like here are our employees, what do they want? What do they need? That is, echoes design thinking principles and all that. It also potentially does not, and I'm just going to be contrarian for a second, it might not create the conditions that the that leaders want. In other words, they're going to go potentially to their legacy thinking and just focus on themselves and not take a broader view. So my question to you, Ernest, because I know you've done work in this, and I know you've done a lot around trust. So do you, when you talk about these conditions, are you trying to craft something intentionally, culturally, or are you looking at the employee's voice as the guiding light? And I imagine it's a balance between the two, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so at Salesforce, we say we are a values-driven company and a values-driven culture, and so we think about and we start with what are our values, and then we start to operationalize them through various actions or experiences or things that we behaviors or symbols and things like that. And so, like you mentioned, trust is our number one value as a company. And as people analytics professionals, we try and put trust as also our number one value. And so we really start to think about anything that we do. Is it trust building or is it trust eroding? Right, and so that's really how we approach all of this, and that's how it sort of drives everything that we do, both as a company but also as a people analytics function.
Got it. Thank you for that. And Michelle, similarly, in many organizations here, you have people all over the world doing work, disparate teams, and so if you're going to them in the current state and designing jobs, for example, what they might go to might not be conscious of a imminent disruption with AI or an outsourced provider or contingent workers that might do some of that work. So there might be some prescriptive nature to the job design. So my pointed question to you is, how do you get at that? And I don't imagine that anyone has it perfectly figured out, but marrying the future of work and org design with the employee needs, how does that come to fruition there at Adobe?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question and dynamic that we've seen at Adobe. Adobe's grown tremendously over the last several years. I mean, just a short while ago, Adobe was a less than 10,000 person company, a little global, not super global, but now we're 23,000 and growing and in, I want to say, close to 40 different countries. And that's been over the last 5 years. So if you start to think about that kind of growth, and Adobe's culture has always been very relationship and person and that connectedness. And for some things, it's been tough to scale. And I think we've had to strike that balance. And I won't claim that we've got it right yet. We're still working through it. But to say, how do we take that kind of human relationship-centric culture of how we pay and design work and think about how we engage and collaborate when we're not all in San Jose. Right. And it's definitely been a challenge, but starting to think about org design and job design and how do you create hubs of kind of these teams where people can work together, but then how do you connect them back to the mothership of San Jose and the headquarters, where there's a large center of gravity for our company, and thinking about how we do that with org design has been a primary way, and looking at a lot of matrixed organizations, which frankly brings its own challenges of like, who the heck do I report to today? And you have to really help your teams focus through priorities, but by driving kind of consistency in roles, and then I would say to these matrixed relationships that we encourage our employees to build so it stays human-centered.
Got it. Because and this is all setting the stage for a question around ethics and AI and just the appropriate use of data. Because if we take Aaron's talk and about, okay, let's do peer coaching, that is going to be an allocation of people's time. There's benefit, but they might not ask for that, for example. So I'm going to skip a couple steps and go to this pointed question. I'll start with you, Ernest. You have tons of data at your disposal. You have tons of data that you can create or access, but you consciously choose not to do certain things. So as we talk about AI, which is an esoteric, ill-defined term, I think, but the ethical gateways, you mentioned trust, but how does that actually how do you find those barriers? How do you come to those decisions to say, okay, this is what we're not going to do? Because you mentioned, okay, if it's going to erode trust, but who's actually making that call?
Who's making that call? I think it's again, it starts with the values that you have, and it starts with your values as a people analytics leader. So a quick sort of story. So I was talking to a customer recently about using data and what they were trying to do, and they talked to me about like, what we're trying to do with all of this data is find the needle in the haystack, right? Find the needle in the haystack. I want to find that person that I want to promote, right? I want to find that one person, or I want to find that group of people. And then it sort of occurred to me that, well, how much effort are you spending to try and find that one person when that hay also has a lot of value as well? And you're just dismissing all of that hay just to find that one needle, right? And so that's where this sort of values-driven mindset really is helpful, because you can't just dismiss all of that hay, because that's not hay, that's humans, right? That's people, right? And so the pursuit of just finding that one person or that select group of people that could be high performers, like, all of that focus and all of that energy, like, could be also spent, like, distributed to try and make that hay and turning that hay into something just as useful and just as productive, right? But that starts with the values that you have in terms of seeing everybody as valuable, as opposed to just trying to find, somebody who's super valuable to the company, right? So,
and in that process, if I recall our previous conversations, you are in effect a gate. In other words, if you say, "Hey, I believe this is a good idea," you'll take it up, and then it'll be, I don't know if it's Mark or whomever is going to actually make a final call. Who's that group that actually makes the final decision based on your vetting of a particular idea?
So Salesforce is a very interesting place. We have made a lot of stands in sort of public stands in terms of how we're trying to use technology. So we have an Office of Humane and Ethical Use. And so they sort of review some of our uses of technology. We have a trust board that also reviews our use of data. And so these are all sort of channels that we have put in place as a company to really help us think through the uses of data, the uses of technology, and hoping that we don't step over the bounds, right? Step over a line that we just can't come back from. And so, it sort of slows us down a little bit, but it makes us very deliberate in terms of thinking about what projects do we prioritize, what projects do we put people, resources, and money behind, and will it actually be a benefit to our employees, or is this just a fun, interesting, like, intellectual exercise that when you think about the application of it, it just becomes problematic in all different senses, right? So, like, that's the way that they help to put those guardrails in for us, just to make sure, like, as a company, we lead with our values as opposed to leading with our value of trust, as opposed to leading with a value of, like, innovation at all costs, right?
Thanks for that. Show of hands, who here has a trust board or a group that's responsible for ethics that actually vets your people analytics projects? Okay, just a handful. All right, point of action. That might be a really, really good idea. Two quick tidbits on that. With Insight 222, in going to our membership, that was the number one need within the membership. That was our first project, led by Ian Bailey, who'll be talking later. So, and also, Keith, who just joined Amazon in a people analytics leader role. Congratulations to him. spoke very eloquently about the fact that if any one of us in this room goes off and Yahoo's this and screws up and it gets front page of the Wall Street Journal, whatever, that's going to impact all of us. So we have a responsibility to really be thinking thoughtfully about how we do projects and where the boundaries are and make conscious decisions. So with that, Michelle, what are your thoughts on this topic? How do you vet and find the boundaries?
Absolutely. I think part of it is making sure we're really articulating what's the benefit to the employee going to be, and not just, as you said, some sort of interesting nerd exercise like, ooh, data, let's go see what we can do with it. I mean, I love that. But at the same time, if we don't articulate, how does this help the employee? How does this get them back to their day job? Get them more connected to the products? What's this going to do? Really pushing on that use case first before we start barreling down the data collection path. I think it's also really important to pull in and collaborate with your privacy team, your security team. I mean, some of those folks are very tactical, legal-minded. They're like, that may, let's not take the risk. But if you start with articulating this is the benefit it will bring to the company and to our employees, you're more likely to navigate, I think, some of those legal conversations. And by getting that team on board before you start barreling down the data collection path, just is going to remove a lot of barriers. Whereas privacy finding out 6 months after the fact that you're collecting data in France that makes them nervous, right? They can shut you down. So when I think about how to get this work done, it's really upfront articulating how is this going to benefit our employees? It's a little bit of that what's in it for them, what's in it for the company, and helping to navigate this is the trade-offs we can make with risk to then be able to move forward. And I think too with Adobe and our products, especially over the last couple of years, we've been starting to look a lot at things like deep fakes and just all of the issues that we're seeing as an industry, and how does Adobe help lead the way? And taking those principles and applying them to the people analytics function is helping us to kind of think and tie to how we think about the business, which also helps us in terms of, is this the right project for us to tackle as a company, or is this going to get us on the front page of the Wall Street Journal in a bad way?
Right. I will tell you, this is not necessarily something that I naturally came to. I've been called up to the lawyer's office, and I'd never want to do that again. So this is actually from personal experience that I've learned this, and it's not, it's nothing about me or the company. It really is about a personal experience that.
We sometimes learn lessons the hard way.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
You got the finger wag.
I got the hand slap. And
so we do have a few more minutes. So if you have questions, I don't know where the other mic is. If you can get it over here, I'm going to ask a couple more before we go there. So data privacy, GDPR, Eden Britt at HSBC. At London is actually the data privacy officer for HR, as well as a people analytics leader. So what's your connection to data privacy at Adobe, Michelle?
Right. So I do have responsibility for it within we call it EX, employee experience, but HR organization. So I'm responsible for thinking about how data gets shared, how data gets created. But Adobe overall has a chief privacy officer, and my people analytics function and her team we are really closely connected at reviewing even basic things like access models. Who gets access to what? What do they get it for? All the way through, we just kicked off a major recruiting implementation, and there is a member of the privacy team on that implementation team. So it's not an after the fact. It's not, ooh, can we collect all this information about people who want to come work for Adobe? It's privacy is in upfront, helping us think through our design principles and how we move forward. So it's not an after the fact thing that we go and we get our hands slapped, but they're in the kitchen with us, so they can really help see oh, that's why you might want to capture that information about a candidate. Okay, that makes sense. that offsets the risk that we see. So it connects them to our business a lot more, which I think is a nice way to do it.
Absolutely. Ernest, data privacy, your connection to
Yeah. So I have on my data engineering team, that team is connected with our trust team, who sort of vets sort of all of the data that we're able to store in our databases and puts all of the parameters in place. And so we're just hand in hand in terms of new data sets, new functionality. All of that sort of has to go through sort of a vetting of by our trust team and our HR compliance team. So it goes hand in hand, just like you said. So it's a trust by design, as opposed to trust as a reaction.
Show of hands, who has a similar connection to your data privacy team? Okay, hopefully that's going to be higher over the years. There's a question over here. And then we'll go
Hi, my name's Valerie. I'm actually the attorney who vets projects like this. And I work for a company with 270,000 employees, and we're just at the beginning of implementing or starting to use AI tools in HR. And I'm here so that I can be fluent in what's going on, and I think it's great. And I want to support the business to start implementing those tools in a responsible manner. I also am wanting to benchmark so that I can effectively make my case to the teams that will be working on these projects. And what I'm curious about, because one of my biggest legal concerns is that any project needs to have a disparate impact analysis conducted. And I'm wondering if that's baked into your kind of ethics charter or the trust board, if you're always doing the disparate impact analysis as you're developing the tool and on an ongoing basis as you're using the tool. Because as I've tried to understand AI, as you're getting new data, the algorithm is learning from that data. And so how the tool may work or the algorithm is learning could change over time. And so in my view, it seems like there needs to be periodic disparate impact analysis that are built in. And do you have kind of established that as part of compliance programs or anything like that?
Well, can I start by saying thank you for being here? I mean, really, I think it's fabulous that you're here and you're trying to understand so that we can partner together. Because like Al said, one big people analytics miss gets on the front page of every newspaper, and we're all going to hurt from it. So thank you for taking the time and the investment to do this. I think for us, as we tie it back to the outcomes that we're after. And candidly, we were not that long ago looking at some AI capabilities for hiring, like I'm sure many of us are. And some of the tools that the outside tools that we were looking at, really approached it with you're going to eliminate bias. You're absolutely going to eliminate bias with our magical algorithms. And I think as people analytics experts, we need to do our due diligence if we're purchasing from the outside. And we need to have kind of assessments set up, both as we're evaluating vendors and algorithms to understand the impact that they might have, but as you said, an ongoing methodology by which we're checking in and making sure that the tuning is right. And I do think that having that connection to what we're trying to accomplish and that goal, and keeping these projects narrow to start and not just sort of opening the gates and AI for everything, but really keeping it small and narrow in scope so that you can tune along the way would be the way I'm thinking about it for Adobe. But
yeah, I think Al mentioned this earlier, that AI a lot of times is it means everything, which means it means nothing. And so it really is about what is the use case. Most of the AI use cases are all about cost optimization right now. And so you have to then think about, okay, if I'm using AI in this cost optimizing sort of use case, what potential issues am I going to come across, right? How is it using data? Is the data actually clean enough in order to eliminate bias? So like whenever I hear about AI companies trying to eliminate bias, I'm like, how are you doing that, right? Because if your data set already has bias in it and your AI algorithm is essentially just a segmentation algorithm or a classification algorithm, like you're just going to be classifying more and more bias, right? So that's like where actually understanding how, like what is actually supposed to be occurring with these algorithms is helpful for you to sort of assess whether or not this is actually going to be putting you into more potential risk or trying to eliminate risk, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but it really depends on the use case. And most of the use cases now, especially in the hiring arena, are all about, let me get my 1 million resumes down to 10 resumes. I don't know how like AI can do that and eliminate bias without like currently. So I don't know.
I just got a chill based on what they just shared, because it's something that I think we all need to understand better than anybody else on the planet, is that most of the analytics, AI, whatever you want to call advanced analytics, is done based on what's called the frequentist approach. Who here has a degree in stats or economics or some research-based discipline like that? So a handful of you. So you understand what this is all about. And it just is what Ernest is saying, is that it's based on the frequentist approach. So if you have a bunch of data, and you're improving the R squared, this is great, but all it is taking the past and implying that it's going to be appropriate for the future. Does that accommodate disruptions and changes that may want to be made? No. So we have the opportunity to, number one, call that out and create data that's more appropriate to answer the questions leaders want or need to know, or individuals want or need to know. So thank you for that. This is going to be the final question, then we're going to go to break.
Hi, we're a software company that is realized that the emails is the last, maybe untapped, greatest resource for figuring out what's going on in the company. And using psycholinguistics and a whole bunch of tools, you can really find out a lot about the company. Prior to email, we used memos and faxes, and at no point did we say, oh, I'm going to put confidential at the top, and then nobody's going to read it. That just wasn't, you knew that it was open domain in some respects. So I don't think there's a single company out here that has an onboarding policy where they say, hey, here's your email account, do whatever you want. It's yours, it's private. So I'm curious, at what point did employees feel like it's my email and it's a violation of that trust that I have with the company if you use that for any purpose other than me sending emojis and cat pictures?
And I would say here at Adobe, we're baby stepping this, right? We have a multi-generational workforce. There are people who've been with Adobe over 20 years, some whole career, and have an expectation of privacy. And then we've got some of our new college grads who are like, well, of course you're looking at my email. It's the company's email. You can see all of that. So we've got really a diverse, just huge diversity of perspectives when it comes to how we use that information. So we started by thinking about, okay, how can we baby step this along and say, maybe we first look at who you're in meetings with, or maybe we look at just the frequency, right? Not the content itself, but let's start with frequencies. And how do we think about looking at that, socializing that, making that normal, and like Ernst keeps saying, build the trust. I mean, would I love to dig into all that data right now and do like some amazing things? Yes, I would. But if we violate the trust, it's not coming back. So we're thinking about it as a baby step. And as we build the trust, as the leadership gets comfortable, as the employees get comfortable, and we're frequently monitoring around employee sentiment and experience, which will help us kind of tune to that, like, ooh, is this violating trust, or are we still solid on the trust?
Yeah, I think it depends on the use case, just in terms of like why do you think it's necessary to really look at that email data? Is there another way? Is there what are you trying to get at, and is there research already being done on those core constructs, right? So I imagine what you're trying to look at are sort of networks or things like that when it comes to looking at email data. What are you trying to learn from it would be my question. And then have other people in the academic space or other spaces already learned some of that stuff that you can start to test? Because ultimately what you're going to be doing with that is to be creating some type of intervention or some type of program that will be impacting the employee base, right? And so really trying to think about, okay, after I get this data, when I find this insight, is this an insight that's already been created somewhere else? Then what is the action that I'm going to take from that insight, right? And just going down to say, all right, what is the intervention going to be, right? What is the intervention going to be? Like, is there another way to get to that intervention without having to erode the trust of my employees by really trying to mine their email data? I would love to do that, right? But then, like, I've got other things that I need to do and other things that I need to develop and implement and all this other kind of stuff to really impact the employee experience, to drive fulfillment, those types of things. Like, let's just make a decision in terms of like where we spend our time and whether or not that time has already been spent by some other people as well, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
I think it did very well. And I just want to say, hey, thank you so much for sharing your insights and ideas. And if you would, give them a round of applause. Appreciate it. We're done.